Well, today we continue on our journey through the 38 blessings, and the place where we are up to at this point in the sequence is a collection of virtues, skills, spiritual practices, you might say, which are rather like soft skills, which help us to be more receptive in a way that will help us to acquire some of the higher virtues in our mind. And over the last few times you've seen me, then we've started to look at the first two of these, which are respect and humility. And today we make a start on that of contentment. The first half, I'll be able to talk about what we mean by contentment and some perhaps discontent. And then next time I see you, we'll look at actually how to cultivate more contentment in life. But all the things I've mentioned are things which need to be talked about, because often the sort of advice that people get in life is things like, oh, you can't afford to be a kind person because if you're kind, then you won't get success in your life. You need to be sort of cutthroat if you're going to get success. And this is sort of general wisdom going around to encourage young people not to be too kind or to have any of the aforementioned skills, otherwise it will hold them back from their aspirations. So we need to do a little bit of explaining if we're going to advocate these sorts of things, especially in the context of a spiritual practice, because they are necessary as a sort of groundwork for the mind. So respect, which we met up with earlier on, helps us to overcome the tendency to find fault with other people. Yeah? So pointing the finger at other people. Last time, number 23, to do with humility, is more to do with how we see ourselves. So to avoid becoming complacent about furthering ourselves by thinking that we are beyond reproach. And one more virtue that we need to acquire for ourselves, especially because the sort of things that we are on a quest for in our spiritual journey are rather elusive, then the next thing we need in the skill set that we need for acquiring those more subtle aspects of the mind is to open up and sometimes just let things happen and take root in our mind, which is a little bit different from the way ambitions or goal-oriented or transactional sort of ways of looking at the world tend to assume that you need to work in order to get success in what you're looking for. Spiritual phenomena sometimes characterized a little bit like trees, where you add the water and the fertilizer at the roots, but where you expect the fruits and the blossoms to occur is not down there in the ground at all, it's up there. And if you are constantly looking for the flowers and the fruits when they're going to appear, and that's what I really am growing this tree for after all, then you forget to do the watering and the fertilizer. So sometimes you need to just forget about the fruits and just be happy to keep on with the watering and the care that you're taking of the tree in order for the fruits and blossoms to actually occur at all. So it's not the blossoms that you need to be interested in, even though in the end that's what you really are looking for. So contentment in a meditation practice is a little bit like the tree. It's if you are too interested in the results of your meditation and where did I get to and what is my attainments in the meditation and when's my next breakthrough going to be, then often it will only stand in the way of your progress. Often, even if it's not a perfectly genuine one, you need to have a sense of contentment with where you are, where you've got up to. Otherwise you can be rather like a person who's whining all day, how come no one ever listens to me? And if you say that for long enough, then you really will have no one left to listen to you anymore. Or another, perhaps useful metaphor is that of playing tennis, I'm told. Good trainers say you shouldn't worry about where the ball is going to go when you hit it over the net. Rather, you should pay more attention to the technique of hitting the ball. If you hit it in the right way, then it will go where you need it to go. So it's concentrating on the technique rather than on the outcome. And really this is where contentment fits in. It's a little bit of a sort of tricky subject to describe, but it's something of the nature of spiritual skills, the sort of things that we need to have in the toolbox. So if we get caught up in expectations or comparing ourselves to others, then we may find that the meditation we spend so much effort in doing will not lead to something that we can recognize as progress. So we're trying to define contentment, and maybe another useful translation of the word, which is you might think about, might be sort of acceptance, a little bit more trendy these days. Acceptance, contentment, they seem to be around the same sort of idea. Originally came from the Pali word santuti. And that can be broken down literally into san, which means oneself. Tuti means happy, so being happy with yourself. Doesn't mean being self-satisfied, but it means being happy with where you're up to. Yeah, being okay with yourself. And outside its Buddhist context, contentment is sometimes maligned, sometimes accused of standing in the way of progress, especially economic progress, making people lazy to change themselves or improve themselves. So they do down contentment. But it is useful to bear in mind that the reason we still try to look at the Pali words in the scriptures is because it reminds us that also in the scriptures they have separate Pali words for things like laziness, or just going off on your own and practicing meditation, that sort of thing. They have special words for those as well, which are not the same word. So laziness, not the same as contentment. Yeah? Different word. And the idea of contentment in this blessing is that if you're able to accept your own strengths and weaknesses and place in society, then you will be in a better place to work on yourself spiritually. And it can be applied to what you have, what you receive, what might be appropriate to you. And the idea of it is to maybe reduce the tendency people may have to fight over limited amounts of luxuries, and also to avoid things like jealousy about other people or infighting, which can be quite common otherwise in society. So different facets of contentment. If you want to sort of get down to the sort of things, just like, be content, yay. But if you start to think about contentment with what, then sometimes it's a little bit more useful as a mirror on yourself to see, to examine whether you have some of these qualities or the ones that you lack. So there's really three sorts of contentment which are described in the Buddhist scriptures. The first of these is what you have. And the Buddha used the Pali words, salapang nati manyaya, you should never look down on what you have, either possess or who you are as a person. So it might mean being content with your family, your job, your appearance, your nationality. Even if there are faults with these things, nonetheless, if you are okay with what you have, however imperfect it may be, So not exactly self-satisfied, but you're okay with what you have. Then you'll be proud enough of yourself to make it seem worthwhile for you to actually work with those things in a way that they can improve. Get the logic? So, you might be a humble shoemaker and you're working in the gutter, which is not on the face of it a really great sort of profession to have, like sitting in the gutter all day long, like mending shoes. But if you can be okay with it and keep on with it, then little by little, taking pride in your work, you start to build up a reputation for yourself, and out of that will come a business which will grow. But you have to be okay with it as the first step. See what I mean? So it doesn't make you lazy. Oh, I'm okay with like sitting in a gutter mending shoes. But it actually leads to something more, sort of almost in an understated sort of way. Some people blame the parents for everything. I'm not happy with my parents. They're just like losers. So why should I bother doing anything worthwhile? So if you blame your parents for everything, it's not going to make you any better off. But you better rechanneling your energy into being okay with what you have and then improving the situation. If you like it enough, then you will improve it. Second component, be happy with what you get. So it also have a Pali word for this, santena, santosa. In the Jatakas, it said, you should be content with whatever you receive. So it means whatever task you're working on, you have to be able to accept the outcome. And sometimes we might have high expectations, and what actually comes out as a result may not be up to those expectations. But if we're okay with it, instead of losing sleep over it, then we won't despair, and we'll be able to make the necessary adjustments next time around. That's the logic of it. So people who lack this sort of acceptance end up assuming that they are doomed to misfortune, and they might obsess over the things that went wrong. But if you can be happy with whatever comes to you, then instead of envying other people who've got better fortune than you and putting a lot of energy into that, let's say you manage to get only a small plot of land and you can build only a small house on it, well, not the end of the world, because actually it's better than renting. And if you love your little house enough, then you gradually work on it, build it up into something which you can then have a foot in the door in order to get further up the property ladder or whatever. Yes. But you have to be happy with your house, otherwise you say, I hate my house, I'm not even going to renovate it. And lastly comes what's appropriate to you. In Pali, it's known as sammena santosa. The aspect of this is to guard against the idea of being pretentious. Let's start with monks first of all. Suppose a monk is living in a humble little temple somewhere and someone comes along and says, hey, how would you like a great big Buddha statue made of solid gold for your temple? Really brighten up the place. I will give this big Buddha statue to your temple. And a monk would probably be quite tempted by that. He'd probably start thinking about, ooh, if I had a big golden Buddha in my temple, then lots of people will come on a pilgrimage just to see it. And my temple will be busy with lots of people coming. I won't need to worry about temple income anymore. Quite an attractive idea. But is it appropriate for his status or status? Well, if he gets a big gold Buddha in his temple, the first thing he's going to need is a security guard. And then he's going to be worrying all day and all night about who's going to nick the Buddha out of his temple. Which, if he reflects on what his actual vocation involves, which is like escaping from all the worries of life and being able to do a proper meditation as a monk, he might reflect, actually this might not be an appropriate gift for me to receive. How about just having a nice, calm backwater temple and then I can get on with my meditation? Yes, much more content. So this is what I mean by what is appropriate for you according to your status. Yeah. So status can be many different things. It might be to do with your vocation, it might be to do with your financial status, it might be to do with the walk of life you belong to. Let's say you are a poor homeless guy who wins a lottery. Some people, they get the news of winning the lottery, they have a heart attack. Yeah, so obviously that was not appropriate, right? So it brings up the question, what might have been appropriate that would not have given a heart attack to the poor homeless guy, but might have helped him a little bit more? So you can see some things that look like a blessing may not be a blessing at all. And other people, they get lottery winnings and then they are inundated with lots of greedy relatives and they're unable to pull themselves out of that situation in a happy way either. So what is actually appropriate? Here we have different ideas of what might be appropriate. Status, potential, like what can you handle in terms of your potential to maybe change in order to accommodate this thing, and then your own level of morality or level of spiritual practice. So you might be a monastic, a householder, someone who's senior, someone who's subordinate, a teacher, a student, military, academic, an odd job man. Different sorts of status in life. And the idea is that whatever you are, how should you approach the things that come to you in a way that's not pretentious? So it might be down to the way you dress, the car we drive, the way we furnish our home, the opinions we express, claims on the open set of ideas, which I already mentioned, I think, last time I saw you, to do with humility, things that can upset other people in a way that if we don't think carefully or thoroughly about the way we choose these things. Yeah? Some people know a few celebrities, so they think they ought to be treated like a celebrity, because like they can name drop a few celebrities. True? Maybe not true, because like you have to do the footwork to be the celebrity, to be treated like a celebrity. Yeah? Not just like by association. So, although the idea of status is not very hip in this day and age, because we tend to have high expectations of social mobility, probably a better way of thinking about this sort of contentment is having a sense of where you feel you belong. Is that more informative? So if you feel you belong, like sincerely, not just with delusions of grandeur, where you feel you belong, what is appropriate to you in that place? Why? Because if you love it enough, then you will do something about it, and that will give you the social traction to improve on yourself. But if you hate what you are, or if you're always hankering after something different, then you won't love what you have enough to do something with it. Yeah? So, next one, potential, is some people have differing levels of potential to make more or less of a situation that comes to them. And depending on how strong that potential is, then they may be able to handle more, like golden Buddha statues or whatever, that they throw your way more effectively than the next person. So it's down to your personal ability to pick up and use what you have. a list which we have sometimes come across, especially if you look back at some of my previous lectures on developing vision in spiritual self-transformation. Sort of thing to pin on your mirror if you want to know just how much of this potential you have. Big enough to read, yeah. Things like your level of inspiration. A more enthusiastic person tends to be able to do more than a person who has a lot of self-doubt, for example. And the other things mentioned there are your integrity, knowledge and experience, your level of generosity, wisdom, quick-wittedness, and the strength of your health. The more of any of those you have, generally the more you can do with more ambitious things in your life or aims. And the last thing is your level of, it says, morality, yatha sarupa. If you have set a certain level of integrity for yourself in life, so monks might have a certain level, lay people might have a lower one, but hopefully some sort of integrity there somewhere, then certain things, although they might be offered up to us for free, might not be appropriate to us if we have a certain level of where we are happy with in our level of integrity in life. So if we realize by doing something or accepting something it would ruin our reputation, then it would be better to say no to it. So let's say someone gives us some free goods off the back of a lorry. What do you reckon? Free stuff. But it may be not inappropriate for us further down the line. So, yes, so that we don't become a puppet to accumulation of more and more things without end. Some of these things we might say no to, because we don't see it as being up to the standards that we have set for ourselves or what we are happy with about ourselves. The flip side of contentment is discontent of various sorts, and generally, in a very glib way, they have a list of what might be called pull factors, which tend to tempt people in various ways, which are really don't need to spend very much time on. Power, money, food, sex, for example. They are external things, but really, if you look at them deeply, they are not the cause of the discontent, because that must be on a deeper level with what people have as a gap inside them. They're trying to fill with these things. So that's the push factors from which the discontent comes. So the internal push factors might be things like getting wants and needs mixed up. So, for example, eating snacks doesn't provide your body's need for protein, so it's more wants than needs. Yeah? Discontent sometimes happens when we forget about the impermanence of things generally in life. For example, we'd like to get something which seems desirable, but even if it's a catchy tune, you can only listen to it a certain amount of times before you get bored with it, right? Why? Impermanence. If you have a beautiful item of clothing which you really just must have it, but you wear it 2 or 3 times and it goes out of shape. So after that time, the sort of contentment wears off pretty quickly. Sometimes we have boom times, sometimes we have recessions, sometimes you make witty remarks which seem great at the time, but usually they wear thin after the first few times of hearing it. So you start to wonder whether that form of contentment was really tenable at all. So, unsatisfactory. Boredom sometimes comes because of not appreciating what we have. Grass always looks greener on the other side, for example. Sometimes it could be fear for the future, leading us to escapist sort of behaviors. So you want to have something as almost as a sort of distraction or as a way of blanking out our expectations. And sometimes it can be down to disappointment with yourself, because you don't have that contentment with yourself. If we went slightly easier on ourselves, then maybe we could turn ourselves around. And then loneliness also can haunt a person if they don't have healthy relationships within their own family, which are founded on love and giving. And the dangers of contentment like that on a personal level can be that they start you on a slippery slope from things like just preferences to things like being attracted to things, and then you've got to have it for yourself, and then you don't care about what you have to do to get the thing for yourself, even if it's going to trample on other people's feet to get it. And on a social level, although it looks like it's stimulating the economy, it does lead to things like unhealthy competition, so-called enlightened self-interest, which usually amounts to profiteering of various sorts, and fan the flames of greed in the mind. And often people say that contentment stands in the way of sort of economic progress, but generally it tends to be that society fails to make progress because those lacking in contentment constantly undermine a fair economic system. So, yes, people are forced to take risks or have less respect for ethics because of that sort of greedy outlook on life. So that is the content and discontent we are talking about. The idea of contentment being that it nurtures what we have to the extent that we are inspired to do something with it, to love something enough to want to cherish it and do something with it. Yeah? And next time I will talk a little bit more about how to cultivate contentment more if you don't have enough of it already. But for today, I'd like to finish up with a little scriptural story, which again comes from the Dhammapada commentary, and it refers to a time in the time of the Buddha when there was a plague in the city of Rajagaha, which was where Buddhism was based at the time. So, pandemic. And there was a home where there were two millionaires, husband and wife, living with a 12-year-old son. And the son was called Kumbha Ghosaka. And the parents decided that they were too old to escape the pandemic, so they urged their son to run away as far as he could, just abandon the home. And before he left, then they showed him where the family treasure was buried. So the son cried a lot, but eventually he decided to go. He didn't want to abandon his parents to die, but he also felt that he was fulfilling their wishes. So for 10 years he stayed away until all the pandemic or whatever had died down, returned to his hometown, and the first thing he thought of was digging up the treasure because he was penniless. But then he had contentment, and he decided that it was not yet an appropriate time for him to be seen with a large fortune, especially if he had no house to put it in, then everyone else would just assume he'd stolen it. Inappropriate. So he reflected that probably the better way to do would be to sign up to work for someone else. And he got a job working as a guard in a house of a wealthy family. And his job was to wake up everyone early in the morning and to go around announcing when it was the time to prepare the food, time to fetch the carts, time to yoke the bullocks, and various other chores. So it's almost like a kind of town crier from the time when they didn't have things like clocks and alarms. And one day the king in that city, whose name was King Bimbisara, who we have heard about before, he heard the sound of the town crier making his rounds. And just from the sound of his voice, I don't know if it was particularly melodic or had a certain quality to it, but the king could tell that the owner of this voice was no ordinary person. So he sent out one of his courtesans to observe the man, find out and get to the bottom of who this person might be. So she observed him for a bit, and she couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, and came back to the king reporting that he is just an ordinary town crier. He had no wealth of his own. He just was working for a wealthy family, that's all. But the king didn't believe that she had got to the bottom of the issue. So he sent her back again to inveigle some more of the truth out of the man. And eventually she found out the family history, and she found out that he was indeed the heir to a fortune. At which point King Bimbisara summoned the man himself, and he was curious to find out why he was living as a pauper, even though he was heir to riches. And the man told the king that he was waiting for the appropriate time to publicly claim his fortune. And the king told him, now is that time for you to go and dig it up. So the young man dug up his fortune, and king appointed him treasurer of that kingdom as a reward for the wisdom and patience, and especially his level of contentment, which he had not to rush into immediately laying his hands on all that buried fortune. So the story has a lot to tell us about the words appropriate and status in relation to contentment. And it would seem that this man's conduct was exemplary, maybe something for lottery winners to learn from there. Yeah, where to bury it, perhaps. So I just finish off with a few announcements today, encouraging you to meditate at home if you can. If you are not already a regular meditator, if you can find 20 minutes to meditate each day, that will help you to not only build meditation into a regular part of your life, but also in a way that you'll see some progress in your meditation as it builds up day by day. Some people like to meditate first thing in the morning, some people like to meditate last thing at night, some people like to meditate in their lunch break if they have a particularly stressful job. But finding 20 minutes each day will give you that sense of continuity on which you can then build at a later time as you feel the inclination. For those of you who may not be so familiar with the meditation technique, there's now an app which you can download for free onto your mobile phone, where you can hear lots of audio tracks leading you through the meditation in different ways from different teachers in our tradition. Here at the temple, we have classes still going on every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The Tuesday evening classes usually have a little bit shorter meditation, that's the only difference. And those will run pretty much up to Christmas, the 20th and the 22nd of December being the final ones for this year. And there's also still the meditation online on Saturday evenings, the MEU, with a monk giving a Dhamma talk and a short meditation via Zoom, which is useful for those who are maybe living a little bit further away from the temple but who like to keep in contact with a group. Next Thursday will be our full moon meditation here, both in person and online. We'll have a little candle lighting activity halfway through our meditation as we usually do. And the theme for this full moon will be family harmony in the holiday season. And at the year's end, we have an informal meditation retreat coming up between the 30th of December and the 2nd of January. It's usually a pretty quiet time for most people. If they can't spend their whole year working, then this is usually the time when they force you to take a holiday. So it may be that many people have this period to join a meditation retreat when they don't have free time at any other time of the year. And it turns out that, although it's mostly for Thai people, there's quite a significant group of English speakers who have signed up to join it, where they might sleep over, or they may come first thing in the morning, go home at night, or they may come for parts of it according to their inclination. But generally we have talks in English going on in the mid-morning and the afternoon sessions, which you might like to come along and listen to, because it tends to be Dharma on a slightly different level, and also an opportunity to meditate as well. So if you're interested in that, then please speak to Kruwan as well. So for today, I think that's probably everything I have to share with you, but if there are any questions, comments or feedback at this point, I'd be very pleased to hear from you.